Kia ora and welcome to our latest Techbytes session where we're talking with Jordan Carter. So for 9 years, Jordan has been the Chief Executive of Internet New Zealand, the operator of the .nz domain space, and a not-for-profit organisation who works to keep the internet open, secure, and for all New Zealanders. And he's been there for nearly 2 decades, and he and I have come across each other, numerous times in that space. And then when I started at Two Hands, obviously we've worked very closely for those last, well, for me, it's been 7.5 years. But now Jordan has decided it's time to hang up his hat. He's seen the internet grow rapidly over the time and the challenges that we face with the internet, which are changing constantly. He has a strong passion for exploring the potential of the internet and how it can be used to improve people's lives and communities across the world. And so, Morena, Jordan.
Kia ora, Craig. How are you going?
Yeah, I'm doing all right, thanks. So look, by way of introduction, can you step back 19 years and tell us what you were doing immediately before and then what led you to joining Internet New Zealand in the first place?
So the story goes even a little bit further back, because I was on the Council of InternetNZ as an elected rep of membership from the 2000 AGM. And that was part of the crew that came in to implement the shared registry domain system in a big political fight 2 decades ago. And I was a university student at the time that I got elected to the board, still doing my undergrad degrees. I was then working in Wellington at Parliament in 2002-03, and a colleague in the Domain Name Commission, Debbie Monaghan, who was the first holder of that, took me out for a drink just before Christmas and said, "Hey, do you want to come and join the staff team?" So I joined the organisation in the Domain Name Commission office, working on DNS policy, and then a couple of years later got pushed back to set up InternetNZ's first research and policy officer role, and then sort of worked my way up the system from that. And in 2013, was asked to be the interim CEO for a while the board worked out what to do when Vikram Kumar departed the organisation, and ended up applying for and getting the role. So now 9 years later, it's been a great time, but it's like, I've got other jobs and other interests in me. So I found every time I try to find the next job from this job, it's so interesting and all encompassing that I just got drowned straight back into it. So I thought I'd leave and then work out what's next, which I'm still doing at the moment.
I can understand that, running an association, an organisation like we do. No one day is the same, and then something else comes along and it sort of drags you back in. And you're right, I think you've got to make that decision to move on. Hey, well, look, you've seen a fair few really decent large challenges in the internet space over that time. What do you look back and think of as the most challenging ones?
Gosh, I mean, the big one when I started was the atrocious and expensive state of broadband in New Zealand. And so a lot of the work that we were doing 2005, 2010 was making the case first for the old unbundling of the copper loop, which will mean something to people of a certain age. And then the arguments around implementing a fibre broadband network for New Zealand. And that kind of had a plan in place thanks to the John Key national government around 2010. And then a lot of attention was going into things like the control of content through copyright law online. The Hollywood studios and co were trying to get us all having internet disconnections if we were so naughty as to infringe copyright in the online world. And the forum for a lot of that was trade agreements, right? So there were interesting fights there. There was a little hiccup in the broadband area in New Zealand in 2013-14 with which led to the campaign that we were both part of on the copper tax stuff. And then more recently, there was a story around the great things the internet could do. And alongside those great things, because it's a system that humans use, there's been a lot of problematic things that have emerged as well. And 15 years ago, it was all about botnets and phishing and scam emails and stuff. And I think we passed legislation in New Zealand, the Unsolicited Electronic Messages Act. But more recently, it's taken more of a harmful turn for people. There's been a lot of the rise of social media and some of its perversions and use and abuse by people often organised by foreign nation states, and in New Zealand infused by a particular slice of our community's deep racism towards Māoridom, have seen some quite disturbing content and so on online. And so I think that in the last few years, there's been a need to do more and do better in that online harm environment. And the New Zealand system hasn't been working. The range of government and NGO agencies that are responsible for those problems haven't been hitting the mark. And a lot of that has been directed at Māori, which is appalling. And we also had our homegrown terrorist incident, not the terrorist, but the incident in Christchurch in 2019 with the mosque's terrorist attacks. And so that was a pretty big wake-up call, I think, for some of us, that these problems were not just annoying chatter online, that they have real-world consequences, and we need to be addressing them as a whole of society. So those are some of the big ones. Well, they're challenging because there's no obvious answer to them, right? Like there's no switch you could flick. They weren't like boring technical problems that you could work out a standard and solve them. It was the internet as a factor in the complexity of human and political life. And so you couldn't just snap your fingers and sort it out.
Well, I think we should talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but let's just take a step back to that 2013 hiccup. I have to admit, I was actually at Chorus at the time, so I'll just make no comment. But we did see a huge public campaign with significant collaboration as the old axe, the copper tax. What was that all about, and how did you get so many groups managed to actually come together? Because it was quite a collaboration, wasn't it?
I think the ease of getting people together was related to how outrageous the thing was that we were fighting. You know, Chorus had done a deal, Telecom had done a deal with the government to build the ultra-fast broadband network, most of it. And all of the forecasts had quite a heavy government and Chorus investment through the build of the network through to 2020, 2021. And then afterwards, it was clear that Chorus was going to be making a lot of money to pay back the debt with interest and to be really minting it for Chorus shareholders. And under lobbying at the time, the government decided to try and implement a $10 a month boost to the price of broadband on the network. And that was what we were calling the copper tax. It's like, you know, this network has been bought and paid for. The idea of a big price boost now to help finance the migration to fiber isn't necessary. It was all in the agreement you signed just a couple of years ago. Coming along and asking now for another $10 a month out of ordinary people's household budgets to fund an even more superlative return for shareholders, just outrageous. So we pulled together a coalition working with a few others and with some really great professional support on the side from a range of lobbying firms, and said, we've got to stop this. And then I think the way it ended the end, that public campaign put a lot of pressure and got a better profile. And it spooked the government's coalition partners such that in the end, it was only National that was in favour of that. And when they realised that the parliamentary support for that legislative change had gone, the whole thing evaporated. So it was it's a pretty feisty campaign. It led to a few high temperature arguments with people. But it was worth doing in the sense that you know, governments can't just act on lobbying from big corporates and shuffle money their way, I don't think. And hopefully it's made that kind of thing a bit less likely in New Zealand subsequently.
It's very much, you know, obviously, if I now put my two hands hat on, very much, you know, in line with who we are around concern about the users of the technology and the space. So, yeah, that's it was a very public and well-constructed campaign as far as I could see. Look, we're talking about challenges, but let's just take a break for a minute and just, there must have been some highlights in those last 9 years that you look back with fondly or even not fondly, but you know they were good points.
Yeah, I mean, like organizationally, InternetNZ Group has gone through a lot of change, and I'm really pleased with how we've moved from being kind of nerdy focused on the tech world to being a much more people-focused organization. That's been a key kind of thread that I've worked on in my time from the CEO's role. A kind of more normal and professional organization than we were. I think we're seen as a bit flaky and a bit kind of chasing the latest shiny thing a bit in the 2010s. And so we've kind of moved beyond that, and I'm pleased with that. I'm really pleased with how the broadband rollout has gone. You know, we knew that this fibre thing would be good, and that the arrangements that have been put in place were kind of world leading here. And it's proved to be the case. You know, just look across the Tasman for the contrast of a bad, bungled broadband policy versus a successful one. And so that's been pretty cool. And I have kind of enjoyed the way that the internet's become more and more useful for more and more things. And that's not because of anything that we've done. It's because of the kind of potential of putting this kind of open communications infrastructure into more and more people's hands. And so, you know, more Kiwis use it than ever before. The sort of price and quality of the service, both on mobile networks and on the course and other fiber networks, is amazing, world leading stuff. And I think also among that, I appreciate the fact that the dialogue around internet policy issues is way more savvy than it was 10, 15 years ago. You know, you had some people talking about the wild west of the internet, and this, you know, it's made of cats, it's made of tubes, it's Skynet. You know, the sort of sophistication of discussion is way better now. And that's across government, across industry, across politics. So that's a reassuring thing as well, because I think it means that as we deal with the challenges that are coming on, we're less likely to kind of lurch into bizarre non-solutions that sound like good sound bites. So those are some of the things I'm pretty pleased about.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's get back to the challenges again, because there's always challenges. Just sitting back, reflecting, what are some of the challenges that are still on the table, as it were, like the big things still to do? We all leave jobs, you know, we never complete, and I presume the Christchurch Core will be one of those things.
Yeah. I mean, the Christchurch Core was to eliminate terrorist and violent extremist content on the internet, and we clearly haven't achieved that. I was always a bit, not concerned, but thought that was a very optimistic goal for the government to set through the Christchurch Core, because eliminating anything in the online world is next to impossible. But mitigating the kind of propagation of problematical content that is about, it has no merits, it's not free expression or anything like that, it's just hatred and violence. Getting that off the internet is an ongoing challenge that hasn't yet been met. Here and in other places, the intersection of that kind of online content with real world harms, or, you know, physical world harms, is something that the system hasn't got its head around yet. Whether you're talking to, you know, police or people in the Prime Minister's department or DIA, that it's seen as too many silos. You know, oh, it's just the internet, or oh, we'll deal with the problem when someone shows up at your house with a gun. You know, you don't want it to get to that point, and you know, the system as a whole isn't good at grappling with it. Another challenge that is not yet solved was really highlighted by the COVID-19 pandemic, where there was a lot of really great work to get people digitized and online. But still, tens of thousands of kids who couldn't get access to proper devices and broadband, and internet connectivity among all the households that could benefit from it, but still don't have it. It's that inability of government to properly conceive of and invest a digital inclusion policy. Solving that problem would be relatively straightforward. It wouldn't take that much money, but there is just this curious resistance at the governmental level to take responsibility for that challenge and really solve it. And that drives me crazy, because there are some really clear benefits there. The case is more than made for solving this, not just in the urban areas, but in the rural areas as well, where I know that you've got a summit coming up later in the year. You know, all of the arguments are so clear, and all of the actions that need to be taken are so obvious. And yet there's just blind spot at the political level to actually solving the problem. So I think that's a really unfortunate thing to still say as a challenge. But those are probably some of the main ones. I mean, you know, there's always new cool things that the internet can be used for coming along. I don't think there's a problem with the pipeline, if you like, of new and innovative uses. I had a boss when I started who used to say that the best thing about the internet is that 99% of the things we'll be able to use it for haven't happened yet. And I was like, well, we might be down to 98 or 97% now. You know, we've made a pretty good progress there. So I think those are some of the challenges. And then zooming out a bit, the internet came from this era of American dominance in the world. That was where the tech started. The US was a key power and promoter of the open and global internet. And in the last 10 years, we've seen growing challenges there. We've seen the distinct approach that China's taken to having a kind of more national approach to the internet. We've seen the interference that countries like Russia and other countries have engaged with through troll farms and bots and so on democratic politics. And we're now in this situation, you know, the Ukraine invasion by Russia has shown, but in some quite stark clarity, that the most open and liberal societies like ours have opened themselves up to vulnerabilities through this open infrastructure. And we need to get a bit more savvy about dealing with that and about engaging with the rules of the road, if you like, in the internet environment. Countries like ours spent a long time just letting the Americans get on with it. And that just doesn't work anymore. We all need to be putting our shoulders to the wheel and making sure there's a distinctive voice from Aotearoa in the forums that shape the internet's technology and its governance. And that's something that I think is a challenge for the 2020s and beyond, because that environment isn't going to get easier. The challenges of that kind of nation state action, of cybersecurity and so on, they're going to keep growing. So we can either choose to try and do our part in tackling that, or we can just keep our heads in the sand. I hope we engage with it.
Well, then, of course, you get the other side of it, which is the words I've heard of, you know, the oligarchs that are controlling social media, et cetera, et cetera. And let's not even get started on Elon Musk buying Twitter, because that has all sorts of possible implications. Who knows what that will bring, you know?
Well, what we do know is that the regulatory frameworks and standards on those big companies are not in place. We've seen this massive concentration of power in social media firms, and even at the internet infrastructure layer, and very few content delivery network organizations and so on. And for a long time, policymakers got bamboozled by this idea that it's the internet, it's all free and open, don't worry about us, it'll be fine. And you just can't have that with such an important sector of the economy and of the society. So working out ways to do regulation that are clever and don't bite off the hand that's feeding us, for want of a better analogy, is also another big challenge that we face.
Yeah. Hey, look, you mentioned about, you know, New Zealand, Aotearoa having a part to play in, you know, the international space. And you and Internet New Zealand are quite involved in quite a lot of significant international work that we don't really know about. So why do we need to be involved in those sorts of things?
The analogy I often draw on is the same as about trade. Yeah. And so New Zealand has been a long time exponent of a rules-based order and open international trade routes because it's foundational to our economic success, right? We've needed to get goods out to the world. And more, the tech sector is a leading export sector. The whole concept of weightless exports, you know, doing things digitally, has grown more and more important. And we've got some amazing tech success stories of companies here offering service to the world. And we need to stand up and be part of governing the way that that works in our interests, which is for it to remain open, global. We all want to be able to market stuff and communicate with people all around the world on the internet. We don't want it to fragment into a system where, you know, you have to have special permission to be able to send an email to China, or where nothing on the internet in Russia works from here, or vice versa. So that involves showing up and being part of the discussion. And we show up to all the intergovernmental forums, the United Nations and so on. But New Zealand is always sort of bowled really light when it comes to getting involved with the internet policy side of things. And the interesting thing about the Christchurch call was that it was a step into a leadership role that New Zealand hadn't taken before. And there's something about our, you know, this might be patting ourselves on the back as a country, but people see us as kind of pragmatic problem solvers who know, like, people know we're not throwing our weight around because we don't have any weight to throw around. It's just the ideas and the capacity to tackle problems in a smart way that we bring to these environments. So we can be quite influential quite quickly if we're there, showing up, doing the work, building the relationships. And so I think there's something there. And the other the other turn that's happening all around New Zealand is the rise of Chao Māori, right? And the concept of embedding utility relationships in our organizations, in our broader society. I know some people find that prospect a bit challenging. I'm not one of those people. I think it's a great renaissance for this country and its future. And that adds a whole additional layer. We're not just another clone of the US or America, of Canada or Australia. There's actually a distinctive perspective from our country. When there's been some discussion in InternetNZ about what would a Te Tiriti o Waitangi based internet look like? How would that affect the way people relate to each other? I don't know what the answers are there, and that's work for the next crop of people at INZ, not me. But there's just something distinctive that I think we could bring that's about working in harmony and peace and being constructive and welcoming, that I think we should do. And organizations like InternetNZ play a role, government plays a role. I think we can be a lot better at telling that story more effective than we have, because it's one of my long-term characteristics is to be more interested in getting on with the work than talking about it. But there's stuff that our country can offer there, and I hope that we engage more than we have.
We had a wonderful speaker at one of our conferences last year who talked about Te Ao Māori being New Zealand's superpower, and it certainly does make us unique around the world. So look, finally, let's talk about you, mate. How have you changed over time? I mean, especially in the last 9 years, and have you got any thoughts on how your leadership in that space sort of changed over that time?
Yeah. When I got the job of CEO, I'd never been a line manager before. I don't know if many people know that. So I had to do the double learning curve of learning how to manage and lead people and work with a board and so on, all at the same time. To any of my colleagues who went through that learning curve with me, I apologize retrospectively in some cases. So I've learned a lot about dealing with staff and supporting people and being able to work through the pandemic as one example. I've become a lot more flexible in my kind of expectations of how people work, and better at acknowledging that just because I've got a way of doing something doesn't mean it's the same as or even better than anyone else's. So getting much better at talking through goals and direction and leaving it to people to set the detail in place themselves. Some people find that challenging because they want more hands-on experience, but I'm firmly a hands-off manager and leader. That doesn't work for everyone, but it works for me, and I'd be a hypocrite if I was trying to do it any other way. It's a bit more relaxed, and also, I guess, more attentive to, seeing things as a system. Like, it's easy when you think about these internet issues to try and just see each one as a discrete problem or area of challenge, but I guess I've gotten better over time at thinking through the linkages between the various areas. And one thing I was probably a really impatient young Tyro when I sort of started doing this work 20 years ago, definitely 20 years ago, a bit less so 10. Maybe it's just the joy of aging, but I'm a little bit more relaxed than I used to be.
Yeah, cool. Hey, look, it's been a joy to talk with you again, and certainly, I'm going to miss you both personally and professionally as you step aside from this role. Got any last comments or thoughts you'd like to share as we wrap up?
I guess the thing about this, in the end, we talk about this as the tech sector, but it's all about the people, right? And, thank you for those words. The thing that I've absolutely thrived on the most, even though I'm actually intrinsically a bit of a shy person, so don't always show it as much as I might, is the amazing people and stakeholders that you get the chance to work with. That's the kind of fabric of what makes the internet work in New Zealand and everywhere else around the world. And so, I can't quite say what I'll be doing next yet, but I know that I'll miss that local stakeholder community here in Auckland and Wellington and around Aotearoa. But that overall, I still think this internet thing is better than not having it. I think it offers some pretty cool possibilities for us, and I just hope we can work together to make the most of it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, again, thank you, Jordan. And you mentioned in there the upcoming Rural Symposium on the, and I can give you the details, the 14th and 15th of June. in Kirikiriroa, Hamilton. It's too big an issue to let go of or to give up on, and it's the first time we've been able to get together as people on this particular topic in person since 2019. And we're also incredibly thankful to Internet New Zealand as the premier sponsor of the event. They've stuck with us. They wanted to be the sponsor last year, but of course we couldn't do it due to lockdowns, etc. So we're really looking forward to that. So thanks again, Jordan, and really all the best for what comes next for you on your journey. And please stay in touch with whoever's at 2Ans. And thanks everyone for listening in today.
Thanks, Greg.